This is the Yamaha XSR900 GP, a brand new sports bike inspired retro for 2024, and on paper this should be right up my street. You see, it's similar to the regular XSR900, but they fitted it with some clip-on style handlebars and a bit of a half fairing to give it a bit more of that sporty look and riding experience. Ever since I saw it when it was launched at EICMA in Milan last year, I've been dying to get my hands on one for review. So does it live up to my lofty expectations? Well, in this video, we're going to take it for a spin to find out. But before we get on the road, I just want to give a massive thanks to REBELHORN for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. I've been using their gear exclusively at the moment and have been super impressed with how it looks and fits, especially considering that it's priced really very well. In this video I'm wearing their VANDAL boots, which I'd happily wear off the bike, but they also feature ankle and heel protection and a reinforced sole to keep your feet safe out on the road as well. Then I've also got their VANDAL jeans, which again, they're protected with knee and hip armor and abrasion resistant Kevlar panels, but these stretchy bits on the knees and butt keep them nice and supple so that they're also all-day comfortable. Up top I'm wearing their Hunter 2 leather jacket, which has a perfect retro style for a bike like this, but I also feel confident wearing it with shoulder, elbow and back armor. Then, to top it all off, I've got their FLUX gloves, which are nice and breezy with plenty of vents, and so they're extra nice to wear on a warm day like today. So once again, a massive thanks to REBELHORN for their support, and there are links in the description to all of these products that I'm using, so do check them out if they look like your cup of tea.
So look, why do I say that this bike ought to be up my street? Well, there's one big contributing factor, and that's that it's based upon the MT09, which I reviewed a few weeks back. Such a brilliant motorcycle. Do watch that video if you haven't already. And one of the standout features, it has to be said, is the CP3 inline triple engine, which is, for me, one of the best on the market. Now, it does have decent top-end power with 117 horses peak. It delivers it with plenty of punch as well, so there's lots to work with, and yet I don't feel like it's excessive. It's a nice amount of power for the road and doesn't feel like it's always going to get you in immediate trouble. The other thing with this engine is the mid-range, lots of torque, very smooth and grunty in the mid-range, and so you don't necessarily feel like you have to massively keep on top of the gears all the time, and yet, even when you do, it's got a very nice gearbox, good quick shifter, and so all round just a super pleasant engine to use, whether it's in the MT09, this bike, the regular naked XSR900, or even the Tracer lineup, which is more of a sports tourer. Plus, I've got to say, listen to that soundtrack.
Now, to manage all that punch, you get Yamaha's latest and greatest tech package, most of which is inherited from the MT09, although I will say, I believe there are a few tweaks that have been made to the specific settings for this particular model. Still, there are 3 preset riding modes of rain, street and sport, and on top of that there's a custom mode, so you can dial in your own favourite combination of parameters. Each of these modes will affect a bunch of lean sensitive rider aids like traction control, ABS and wheelie control, all powered by the 6-axis inertial measurement unit, and then on top of that there's a quick shifter as standard plus cruise control. One thing I really do like here though is the fact that you get the bigger, easier to read 5-inch color TFT display from the new MT09 as opposed to the 3.5-inch display from the previous gen MT09s that you still currently get on the standard non-GP XSR900 model. This one is nicely laid out and also easy to control with the updated switchgear, and I really do appreciate this extra retro-inspired layout specific to the GP model with a replication of an analog rev counter with the speed off to one side in a font that's made to look like an LCD. So yes, in summary, a very good, very modern suite of electronics, despite the old school external appearance of this bike.
Now, one of the key differences between the XSRs and the MT09 is that they have lengthened the chassis ever so slightly on the XSR models. And I think I'm right in saying that that's mostly down to the swing arms. So they do feel a little more stable. If you were to ride them back to back, the MT09 is the one that's probably going to feel a touch more flicky. But all the same, and especially when you compare this to the rest of the retro-inspired market, where you've got a lot more of those old-school feeling bikes with oversized front wheels for a bit of that retro look. You know, this is firmly planted at the more sporty end of the spectrum. Easily fast-turning enough for me, and also you've got a decent suspension setup which helps you to get it dialed into your taste. And I think it's got a really nice quality to it for the road. Up front, you've got an upside-down KYB fork with plenty of adjustability. It's a KYB monoshock at the rear as well. And with this particular GP model, I think they've made a couple of tweaks to the setup. So one is a wider spectrum of adjustability versus that standard XSR900. And I suppose with the slightly more sporty intent, there is the chance you might take it for the occasional track day or something like that. So more adjustability is hopefully going to help you find, you know, an ideal setup when you're riding it harder and you're at the extremes of what the suspension is capable of. Also, I do believe they firmed it up a little bit on the fork and also softened the shock ever so slightly. Potentially that's because the rider's further forward. You've got these lower bars, so you want a bit more support at the front. Less required on the shock as well, I guess. But also, they're probably expecting you to ride this bike a bit harder, and so you might want a bit more support on the brakes. And look, I'm not going to say it's an out-and-out aggressive super sport style bike, but personally this is more so what I'm looking for. A nice balance, a sporty feel, but still suitable for the road and enjoyable on the road.
So look, absolutely loads of performance, a brilliant bike to ride, but what I really like about it is the way it's paired with this brilliant retro aesthetic. To me, it really is a thing of beauty, and while the regular XSR900 did look a little bit tail heavy, I think the fairing up front, especially with the optional lowers that you've got on this particular press bike, really does balance it out for a very nice overall profile. I'd probably go for the optional accessory pipe, which sticks up at the side and I think is more in keeping with the typical look of the sort of bikes of the era that this one's based upon. But otherwise, across the bike, you've got plenty of nice little details. I think they've done a brilliant job of this front end and hiding the headlight away here, a little daytime running light up top. Things like the bar end mirrors are really neatly done. And I also like the fact that you've got little fasteners and bolt heads here and there that again, just add to the feeling that this is a sports bike from 20 or 30 years ago. As for color choices, well, of course, this one is inspired by the Yamaha Marlboro race bikes of yesteryear, but there is also a much more stealthy looking black and grey option, and I think with those two they've got pretty much both tastes covered, either the stealthy vibe or something a bit more exciting which still has some history to it. Now another plus for me is the price, which I think, considering what you're getting, is fairly reasonable at £12,500. Now sure, it is quite a step up from the MT09, which is fantastic value for money at about £10,100, and if you are more of a fan of the modern aesthetic and the upright bars, then clearly that's the one to go for, given that you'll also save the best part of £2,500. But I don't think the MT09 can come even nearly close to the visual specialness that you get with this bike, and taking into account just how much of a transformation it is, I think the extra cash is almost certainly worth it. Plus, if you look elsewhere at what you can get for this sort of money, a Speed Twin 1200 from Triumph or a Kawasaki Z900 RS, well, both would be about the 12 grand mark, and so for a bike like this, which I think gets quite a lot more pizzazz, another 500 quid doesn't look bad at all.
So I guess with all that in mind, the question you might be asking is there any reason not to buy one? And is there anything that's a drawback about this bike? And I think it's going to come where most of you expect, and that's the slight compromise you've got in terms of comfort. And again, like I was saying earlier with the ride quality and that sort of thing, it's not a really aggressive sports bike. You can see the way that these clip-on style bars actually sit above the top yoke, and so it's not that low at the front end. You're not really like aggressively reaching down, but still, naturally, if you do compare this bike to the riding experience of the MT-09 or the standard XSR900, it is more canted forward, the pegs are backing up a bit, the bars are down and forward, and so you're rotated from the saddle into a more flat-backed position that does lend itself to the sort of riding that this bike is absolutely intended for. And look, I still think it's pretty serviceable for moderate to long days in the saddle. It's not terrible at all, but it's just if you do want something a little more versatile, something you might commute on, something you might do weekend tours on and massive days out in the saddle, then potentially you're going to get on a little better with the regular XSR, or if you're pushing a bit further than that, then certainly the Tracer 9 is more so going to be worth a look. Whoa, for short blast though, out of that lineup, the Yamaha 900s, you're really not going to be able to beat this thing. Woo!
Thing is, there's nothing really else in this sort of 80s and 90s sports bike inspired style that currently exists on the market. And while we have seen quite a lot of bikes inspired by that sort of era of race bikes on the custom scene, take the Bike Shed show a couple of weeks back for example, there was plenty of that sort of stuff. This is really in a field of one when it comes to the mainstream mass-produced side of things. Perhaps something like the Triumph Thruxton might scratch a similar itch, but it is a little bit more old school looking and feeling. And maybe to some extent the Kawasaki Z900 RS SE does that sort of performance and stylish thing both in one package. But look, if you want something genuinely sporty that has the retro looks and yet the modern underpinnings, then this is probably one of the best to go for. Also, do consider the MT-09 if you're on a strict budget and you don't really care about the looks. And I will say the regular XSR900 is still a great choice if you do like this sort of aesthetic but you want to be sat upright. But look, if you do want something that looks that little bit more special and you like the sort of semi-low handlebars, you're not planning on doing many longer rides or tours, then you almost certainly have to go and demo one of these. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see my full review of the 2024 MT-09, which is a great choice if you're not a retro fan, or if you're looking to stick to about 10 grand, then I'll put it on the screen now so you can give it a click and give it a watch. Hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on YouTube. A massive thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.